Hello and a huge warm welcome to the podcast today, and to my guest, Leslie Palanker, who I'm really excited to chat to about all things museum learning, SEND and EBSA, which will be super interesting. But first, let me tell you a little more about our guest. Leslie is a learning coordinator for Northeast Museums. Now, Northeast Museums is a major regional museum, art gallery and archive service. They manage a collection of 12 museums and galleries across Tyneside and Northumberland. The archives hold collections of international importance in art, science and technology, archaeology, military and social history, fashion and natural sciences. Leslie has worked across the services, museums and galleries and has developed and led numerous learning programs for primary, secondary and early years children, families, SEND schools and units and adults with PMLD. Most recently, she has been involved in the pioneering EBSA programming for local families experiencing emotional-based school avoidance or non-attendance. This program has led to a 3-year partnership with the National Gallery and their Masterpiece Tour. Leslie is committed to delivering world-class learning and engagement programs that stimulate and inspire, offer places to play and be curious, invent, think and reflect, and allow audiences from a variety of backgrounds to share time with other generations and diverse communities. Leslie is especially concerned with reaching those facing barriers to engagement, from SEND learners to those from areas of deprivation, and believes that all audiences of all types should have the opportunity to contribute to, as well as draw from, their learning experiences. Prior to this, Leslie lived in France and was the head of the primary EAL department for the International School of Nice for 10 years, where utilising the creative arts in teaching was an integral part of the programme. Leslie studied history of art, has an MA in museum studies, and owned and ran her own gallery in New York City, showcasing the work of American and international outsider artists before moving abroad in 2000. What an incredible bio. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Leslie to the podcast today. How are you, Leslie?
I'm great, Lucy, and thank you for the invitation.
Not at all. You have done so many incredible things. And from a personal perspective, the work that you're doing around supporting learners with SEND, particularly EBSA as well, the work around EBSA is really interesting to me for my personal research interest as well. So I can't wait to dig into an array of questions that I have for you today. But to just start us off, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into museum learning and the engagement and what drew you to coming into this field?
Right. So originally, my background was in art history. I studied art history, and I grew up in a family of artists and art collectors. So for me, it was just a natural gravitation to the art world, really. And I started out in New York City working in an art gallery, eventually owning my own. And then I moved abroad. And the only skills I really had were working in an art gallery. So I decided to learn how to teach English because I was living in France. And I got a job in an international school doing just that. But I used my background in art in order to help children learn the language. And I found that introducing paintings and introducing making and just being creative really helped them embody living in the language. And so I started combining the two. I then left France after 10 years and moved to the UK. And at that time, I really didn't know that there was such a thing as museum learning, believe it or not. It just wasn't that sort of thing. I mean, I'm quite old, to be honest, and I did my master's in 1983. So those sort of things just didn't exist. And when I moved here, I found out that actually while I was looking for a job, you could combine teaching and your background in art. So I started volunteering because I'd never done it before. And I volunteered because I'm here in Durham. So I volunteered at Durham University and I worked in their learning department. I volunteered in Newcastle, which was Tyneside Archives and Museums, was now Northeast Museums, and for the Baltic. And I was doing all this great stuff and learning from really great people. So I then eventually found my place in a permanent post. And I've been working for Northeast Museums for 14 years.
Wow. It's incredible, isn't it? I think it's so lovely when you find a role that really encompasses what you're passionate about, but takes you in a new direction that you just didn't even realize was a thing. Like you say, coming over, didn't realize museum learning was a thing. Do you think your experience in kind of arts and working in schools and all the kind of different aspects of what you do you think that has really fed into how you approach learning and how you approach kind of your interactions with different individuals within that space?
I do. I think that having been a EAL teacher, teaching those whose first language isn't English, and that actually puts them at a disability to begin with. And so if you're thinking that way, the way you approach things is going to be different. You're going to listen more closely to that individual. They're an organic thing, they're a human being, and everyone's different. And so I learned to really listen to each individual person's individual issues and try and approach from that perspective. I think that trying to do to people is the wrong way, and I've learned to do with, and that's really the best way to create.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of really the ethos underneath that inclusive way of being, and really understanding actually who are you in the room with at that time, what's the context, and how can we deliver the best learning opportunity in that space. I think when we look at museum learning, there is a huge misconception around the fact that museums are really quiet places, even using terminologies like boring. I'm going to use inverted commas there. What would you say to people about museum learning to help kind of debunk that? How would you describe what learning in a museum can be like?
Well, like I said, years ago, I didn't know there was museum learning. And years ago, it was that place where you couldn't make any noise. Now it's very different, because I think we've learned a lot about education. We've learned a lot about child development. And it's really important to engage through fun. Through making learning a process that comes from within, as opposed to dictating that learning to somebody. And within a museum setting, it's so easy to do that, because you have all these wonderful pictures that depict a myriad of situations, things that people can relate to and things that people can imagine. And I think using that as a springboard, imagination, and jumping into a picture, or imagine what it would be like to hold that 2,000-year-old object, because you actually can hold it, and try and just put yourself in a situation, whether it connects to you because it brings out a memory, and so you can jump off from that, or it doesn't bring out a memory, but it evokes your imagination. And so museum learning is fun. It's engaging. It's inquiry. It's asking questions and looking closely and slowly, taking time. There's no pressure. There's no judgment. At least that's the way it should be. And I think that enables audiences to relax and to really make a connection, because you need time to do that. It doesn't happen like that. And in school situations, I find that from talking to young people, that they don't feel trusted in a school situation, that learning is very tense, and you have to be on the ball all the time. You can't think, you can't relax. You have to answer, or you have to listen. It's very passive. And I think museum learning is active.
And I think what you've said, one of the things you said there was really key and really stands out, is you can touch things. And I think that's a huge misconception, isn't it? Is that, everything's on display and you have to walk around and just passively take it in and read things and don't touch and be quiet and things like that. And I've spoken to many different people within this museum and heritage sector, especially over the last year or so. And everyone's saying the same thing. They're like, no, come in, touch it, get involved, engage, have conversations, be loud, have fun. And I'm so happy to be able to provide a space to get the word out there, because it is such a different experience to what people expect it to be. It's like the whole ideology behind a library as well. You can only whisper, you can only well, actually, no, you can. There are spaces where you do need to be quiet and respect other people's kind of working spaces and that. But actually, these spaces are a lot more lively and engaging than maybe when we were younger and how things used to be.
Well, that's interesting because, I had an experience where 2 years ago, we had a partnership with the National Gallery before the one we have now. And it was the Constable Tours. And it was a pop-up. So we got John Constable's The Cornfield, which is, an iconic artwork. And we brought it to South Tyneside and we put it in a shopping center for a week. And it was the most amazing experience for the local community, for the schools. But what was interesting was I had a school group in and people were upset because the group was blocking the painting, and I was trying to run a workshop. And I thought, well, this is for everybody. And actually, contrary to that, most people feel that life that children bring into a space when they're running around and they're looking at things and they're doing a trail actually makes them feel lively. So I found that situation really interesting because it's unusual. These days, people love to see children running around and drawing and sketching and finding out information. It's part of the museum experience, I think.
And I think that's important, isn't it? It's that kind of development of understanding and awareness of child development, as you touched upon earlier, and understanding how children best learn. And if we want to reach children, if we want to get them more excited about, our history and the heritage of where they come from and things like that, we need to tap into how do they best learn. And actually, that is in a very active way. That is, experiential learning and touching and feeling and using all of your senses and feeling like it's a safe space where you can ask questions and actually they can ask questions to incredible people like yourself that have incredible depth of knowledge on what they're interested about. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I am definitely seeing more engagement within this sector for learning opportunities. And yes, lots of places have offers on for schools and things like that, but actually we're getting more and more people looking outside the box and looking at those informal learners that are not within a mainstream setting and how can we engage them and things like that. And I think you touched upon earlier about kind of barriers and SEND and things like that, and that's a very real barrier for a lot of our young people. So I want to talk a little bit about the SEND programs that you've kind of led, both with children and with adults. And what does kind of a genuine, inclusive museum experience look like?
I think a genuine, inclusive museum experience starts, first of all, before your audience even enters the museum. It's about connecting with those communities and sitting down and talking to them and finding out what they want, what they need, and then going from there and offering something which enables them to engage, but by doing so, everybody can engage. So I have a really good example, which is this Sensory Journeys program that I developed back when COVID struck. So I was already working with SEND schools and adults with SEND or adults with barriers to learning. And COVID really affected this population greater than everyone else because already they had barriers to leaving the home and getting places. And now they were really isolated. So I reached out and I knew that they wanted programs that were on demand in a way, so that if they couldn't leave the house, because they had intentions to come, but things crop up. Especially when you have children with SEND and maybe family members have other disabilities. So they wanted something they could access when and where they were. So like anytime at home, for example. And it wasn't demanding. They didn't have to pay for it. They didn't have to show up at 1 o'clock, to make the start. It started when they were ready to start. So I developed this program that was basically accessing the museum and its collections outside its walls, which was perfect because nobody could go to museums at that time. And I put up 3, and it was all sensory based. So it was all about tasting and smelling and hearing and touching and using things things that were in the home already to make sounds, what we call Foley art. So I spoke to Foley artists, I spoke to SEND teachers, and I spoke to professionals in the SEND community, and I spoke to families, and I developed this wonderfully sensory, engaging program where they go online, it's free. And I spoke to SEND schools even about the designing of the website. So everything is thought about by the user. That's the thing. You need to think about the user's experience. And there are these 3 fantastic stories that engage you with local history, and you make the sounds to bring it to life, or you taste things. It's all prompted. And then you can go to another section where you look at things from our collection that relate to those stories, and prompts the audience to create things, to act out things, to imagine things, to make things. And then there's a sound library, so you can go and just listen to the sounds over and over again if you want. There's transcripts, so you don't even have to use the website. You can read it like a bedtime story. So really, there's many levels in order to engage. And I think that's the key thing also with museum learning. And you have to think about that. And that's a really inclusive program. So it starts before, and when they're involved, you've got to have ways of engaging different levels, different entry points into that learning. And that's really knowing your audiences and knowing how they learn best. And you touched on sensory, and sensory is my specialty. And I just love everything I do now involves your senses, because that's the best way to really engage and start to feel things. And that's what we want people to do when they come into the museum and look at stuff and engage with us, is to feel. Because if you feel, you think. And if you think, you learn.
I love that. And I think it's really clever how you've kind of brought that element of sensory and experience outside of the walls of the museum. And especially, so you said that you did it through COVID, which was an incredibly challenging time, and everyone had to move really fast and flex and change and rework things to still be able to keep going. And it's great that you got a product like that out of it, because it really means that people can engage from a wide variety of different backgrounds, experiences, needs within the community. And I love that you really involved that community in actually developing it and meeting those needs. Is that something that's still available now, or was it just through that period?
No, it's a core thing of our service now. And in fact, the National Gallery, the way we got the partnership for the Constable was because they saw this and they wanted one created for the cornfields, because it was such a sensory experience when looking at it. And they wanted to reach out to that community, to those with disabilities. So we added that one, and that was the 4th one. And now with our partnership with the National Gallery for 3 years for the Masterpiece Tours, I've just done one for our Monet. We have a Monet that's just opened up a couple of weeks ago. And this has been the most fantastic learning program, actually, in terms of sensory engagement and entry points into looking at a work of art and experiencing a collection that supports that, the exhibition that supports it. We have a quarter of the room dedicated to resources that have been made that go along with the sensory poem that was written. And all of this was developed by Lived With practitioner called Julia Collar. I don't know if you've heard of her before. She's someone you should interview. She's amazing. And she has been working with me for many years to help me write stories and develop sensory resources, but these are incredible. And we've had amazing engagement with people with disabilities and people without disabilities, so everybody can engage, but even adults with dementia. And one comment came back where my 82-year-old aunt was able to really engage with the painting because she listened to the story, she touched the resources, she smelled the smells, and this was better than any therapy she could have ever had.
Oh, wow, what a compliment.
It made me cry. I mean, I thought it was such a fantastic comment. And it really shows the power of sensory engagement and enabling people to look at things in their own way and on their own terms.
And I think you've just described it perfectly there, because I think that when we think about developing things for a particular audience, so for example, SEND disabilities, but actually by doing that, you've reached a lot wider than you anticipated. You've reached people outside of that demographic that the original plan was for. And I think that goes to demonstrate that actually when we're making these decisions around how we're going to deliver something, if we kind of try and meet the needs of those with challenges, we're actually reaching so many more people as well. And that wasn't in the plan, but actually the outcome of that is incredible. And the feedback that you've got from that is just goes to demonstrate that reach that you can get through something just by kind of incorporating multiple senses on something. You're reaching people that may not necessarily have had the opportunity to engage in something like that. And that's an incredibly powerful thing. Are there plans to kind of keep going and keep providing this for that? I mean, it must be infinite. The amount of different opportunities in this space must be huge.
It is infinite, and the plans are to keep going. And currently, I'm actually mentoring other museum services on how to implement this, because my whole idea is that I think everybody should be doing this. I don't want to just be the only person doing it, because it benefits everyone everywhere who's going to engage with a cultural institution. And it's so easy to implement sensory, even small sensory engagement resources into your collections, whether it be archives, libraries, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be art, and it's really welcomed, and it helps people relax. And I think if you're trying to increase also your audiences and have repeat customers, so to speak, the way to do it is to give people what they want. And I think programming really shouldn't be about what's best for the museum, but what's best for the communities that you're serving. And so I always keep that. That's at the forefront for me. That's what I base my practice on.
Yeah. And I think it's great how you're not just doing something that is benefiting a demographic of a particular community, but what you said there about actually you're supporting other museums and other, institutions to do the same. So that collaborative communal working partnerships with other organizations to deliver the same is really incredible, because actually you're not gatekeeping it just in where you are, but you're wanting to share it wider and get more people involved. And it's great to hear that they're so receptive to that as well. And that kind of ties into what my next question was going to be, and you've touched upon this very lightly, is what can other places do? There might be restrictions in terms of manpower to do something, funding to do something, physical barriers to putting things in. But there must be kind of little things that people can start to do within museums that go towards building this. So what are kind of some of the smaller things that people can start implementing
in order to build sensory resources?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't have to be expensive. So that's the first thing.
Right.
You could do it on a shoestring. So, for example, if you have an object that you want people to just stop and look and hear what you can hear in it. So, the plastic packaging that vegetables and fruit come in?
Yeah.
It's everywhere. Everybody buys it and you throw it away. But actually, I use it to make the sound of crunching on the leaves or crackling of the trees, newspaper, cutting them up and stapling them and waving them is walking through cornfields or hearing the leaves in the wind. Washing up gloves, smacking them together is the sound of birds. So we're talking about free, because I steal these newspapers from the metros. At the end of the day, I'm like, I'll just take a chunk of those. I'm sure Metro would be happy to know that I'm using them in a good way. And so honestly, it doesn't cost anything. And so I'm advising people to just look at one painting or one object and what do you hear? What do you see? What do you smell? What can you taste? And provide that in a paper bag or in a basket, in a box. You don't even have to buy that. And put it next to the picture and let people play, let people imagine, let people do what they want to do with the simple prompts that you've put there.
Simple.
It's very
straightforward.
Simple. Very simple, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay for a practitioner to make you these resources.
And I think, this is key, isn't it? Because the purse strings are so tight for many organizations, companies, organizations, charities, everyone trying to do work for and with our families. And it's really, really hard because funding just is non-existent. It's really hard to get any sort of funding for things. So these kind of little snippets of ways that people can start embedding it, start incorporating it, because I think sometimes people can get tied up on the idea of, I have to have a complete program, I have to have, a complete framework around what I'm doing and outputs and monitoring and all things like that. And all those things are great. And all those things are how it's going to develop and move forward. But you don't need that to start.
No.
And I think that's really key, that we understand, actually, if we can just do one little thing today or tomorrow or next week to start the process, then you're already further forward. You're already making an impact on those people. So that's a great tip that you've given there, and a really easy way to just start bringing this into your organisation. I'd really love to talk a little bit about the work around EBSA that you're doing. This is something that a lot of families are facing every single day. For anyone listening who hasn't come across the term EBSA or EBSA before, can you tell us what it is, and then a little bit about the work that you're doing in this space?
Right. So it's EBSA and EBSA because there's conversations about how it should be explained. But basically, it's emotionally based school avoidance. So they don't go in, or non-attendance. So maybe they go in, but they're out more than they're in. So this project came about a year ago now, or a year and a half ago. We were approached by South Tyneside Council's educational psychologist. So because in the area where we are, there are high levels of this, and especially after COVID, where young people are suffering high levels of anxiety. And I think, going back into schools and having to catch up, and whatever the reason be, even teachers are suffering anxiety. The combination has created, unfortunately, this situation for many. And it doesn't just affect the children, it affects the whole family, because, if a child isn't going into school, that means maybe the parent can't go into work. So the dynamic, it's like a domino effect, and that just creates more tension and more stress. So this educational psychologist approached us because she had an idea that she found within the young people she was working with, there was a common thing that they all enjoyed: art. And so she contacted us to see if we could partner together, and the museum could provide support in this way to these young people to use art in a way to express how they were feeling, so that other people could understand. So it was really like a mirror for everybody to see what was going on. And it involved not just the young people, but an adult came with them as well. So the adult had to come with them because it was after school. And the intention wasn't that the adult was even going to be involved in the project. It was just really supposed to be for the young people. But something organic happened, which was amazing. And conversations started happening, and we were talking. And basically, I met with them once a week for an hour for 6 weeks. And I just used the artworks to bring up themes that might resonate with them, like self-portraits, so thinking inward about yourself or how people perceive you, a sense of belonging. So this was a local museum, so this is where they grew up. and the stories that are in the museum are local to them. And the parents had been coming to the museum since they were younger. So there was this immediate connection there. And there was this intergenerational sharing with their children and with me. And looking at art and giving them this space to then sit down and just create and let it resonate within them and let it come out on the pages. We lost a few, not all of them stayed because they couldn't cope, just even crossing the threshold into the museum for someone who suffers from EBSA is a huge accomplishment. And so these young people and children don't feel good about themselves, and they don't feel good about the school system. And it's another example of where things are being done to them instead of with them. Schools aren't really listening. And so this program was set up so that we could listen. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. I listened and they let me in and we talked and it was amazing. And we had an exhibition. So at the end, this was the prize. The prize was a curated exhibition that everyone could see. It was in the museum. And the idea that people were looking at their work and reacting to their work made them feel amazing. It gave them confidence. It gave them pride in who they were and that they could accomplish something, and that it was non-judgmental.
Yeah.
And there was trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the importance on acknowledging the range of skills that can be obtained from something like this is really important, because on the surface we can look at it and go, oh, this is what this project is looking to do, but actually all of the other things that come out as a byproduct of it are super important. And I really love the fact that you acknowledged early on that you lost a few people in the process, because it's important to understand that research isn't always perfect. Mm-hmm. And you don't always get the outcome that you initially planned to go in. And it's really important to acknowledge that actually this wasn't the right time for those individuals. They would have got a benefit from the work that they did do with you, but actually it's really important in that moment to acknowledge, okay, this isn't the best thing for you in this moment, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's okay for you to take that step back. And again, acknowledging the fact that research changes. You go in with a plan, all best laid plans. You go in with a plan, and the information that you get, the kind of data that you collect throughout those conversations, throughout mm-hmm. those interactions with those young people, actually changes the direction of where you're going, because they give you information that you didn't know prior to that. Mm-hmm. And I love that you have taken that and it has merged and it's formed and it's developed going forward, because it's quite easy in a moment to go, actually, that's not part of the plan, so we'll just put that to one side and we won't acknowledge mm-hmm. that. But you haven't done that. You've gone, this is really interesting. I'm learning from this. Let's merge that into making this more effective going forward. So I love hearing that about research and seeing how it kind of merges and morphs and changes over time mm-hmm. when you're talking to young people, which is great. It's wonderful to hear that they had that output at the end of the exhibition. They were able to showcase it and see other people enjoying something that has come from them. And mm-hmm. I can only imagine that really deepened their sense of belonging to the project as well. Mm-hmm. Is that something, so you're saying the project is still going? Is it something that they continue to be part of, or is it a different cohort that you work with going forward? How does it work in terms of that?
So it has changed because we're no longer working with the educational psychologist from South Tyneside, and it's turned more into intervention. So right. I'm going into schools, and the heads of the schools have identified groups of children who are exhibiting non-attendance or no attendance. And engaging them in school. Now, of course, that has its challenges because in the name, it's school avoidance. So you go in and they may not be there. Some of them are. And so every week is different. You might have 2, you might have 5, you might have 1, but, that's fine. And I'm working with several groups. So it's really grown, the project. So I'm working with a primary school, and I was going into that school. I'm working with young people who are local to the community who are not in school. So it's not the same thing as homeschooling, which I know you've touched upon in your program, because these people aren't electing to teach their kids at home. They're teaching their kids at home because they have no other alternative. So I'm working with some young people in that situation that are local to the community. I'm also working with a college, and I'm going into the college, and it's a pilot program that has stemmed from the South Tyneside Council people. So I'm doing that. And I'm also working with two groups in France, in Argenteuil, because of the Monet.
Oh.
And because we're doing the EBSA with the Monet this year, and this Monet is a picture of the Seine in Argenteuil, where Monet lived at the time. I'm also working with young at-risk children there who are doing the same project with me, and their work's going to be exhibited alongside the primary children here in South Shields. So it's really grown, and the research is quite interesting, and I'm keeping a diary. But I think it's an intervention more so now. That's kind of what's happening, helping them look forward to school, seeing that, there are ways around how they're feeling, using art to channel it, perhaps, thinking about the end result that they're not achieving, they are achieving. And so if I can achieve this, I can achieve something else. Let me keep trying. And so it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. And I'm enjoying working with all of them. They're all unique and fantastic.
I love that it goes across so many different types of individuals as well. Like you would, and I know from my experience, when you talk about EBSA and EBSNA, it's something that is very prevalent in kind of primary school, secondary school, and the fact that you're kind of breaching over into kind of college and further education as well. So that's a whole other layer of individuals that are experiencing something that isn't necessarily your first thought when you're thinking about access to education. So that's great that it kind of spans across that. And then obviously going over into France as well, bringing in that different perspective. I can imagine the outcomes to this research is going to be so interesting. And it may be too early to ask this question because I don't know how far along you are in this project, but are you starting to see any sort of indications of changes within these young people in terms of how they feel about accessing school or college or wherever their education is?
I haven't yet found that. In fact, I've found the opposite, which says something. So, like I said, the parents are involved, and one of the parents had said to me, "I'm kind of nervous about my son joining this group. Is there going to be any discussion about getting back into school?" And I immediately said, "No, there is no discussion about getting back into school because that's not what it's about." Really. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to understand about working with those with EBSA. And so they did come, and she said, "This is perfect. This is great. And, it's wonderful." Because it's about building skills. It's about building awareness. You've got to do all of that first before you can even consider getting back into school or any of that. If working and schooling at home is working for them, that's fine. Perhaps they'll go on to university. There will be at some point maybe some formal education in that way. But the goal is not to see that, at least not from my perspective and what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Certainly I will capture that data. I do know from the other cohort that one of the children did go back into school, but the others didn't. Mm-hmm. He was a lot younger. He was 9. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he is still now, but I know that at the time we were doing the project, he had gone back into school. So I think time will tell. And I am going to track, and this is a 3-year stint supported by the National Gallery. So I will be able to track. So hopefully we'll be working with the same people. So I'm hoping to do a PhD with this information as well. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Wow, that's really exciting. And I love that we can kind of start something with initial kind of curiosity and wonderings around a topic, and it can merge into something that could potentially be really impactful and really big on a scale where it can cross not just different contexts, but different age groups, different experiences and things like that. So I'm going to be really excited to follow the progress of this and see kind of where it goes. We touched upon earlier about how you get kind of different skills out of this. It's not just a case of coming into this and then the end goal is getting back into school, but actually the different skills that the young people are gaining from this, and I guess the parents as well, that I mean, we mustn't forget that the parents are involved. What kind of skills are we talking about in terms of as a byproduct of being involved in something like this?
Social skills, for one, because I think at the core, a lot of issues stems from social skills and having anxiety around that. And a lot of these people don't know each other. They're from different schools or they're from different, areas. So it's not like they're there with their friends. So they're making friends. I can tell you, for example, right now with the 2 young boys that are in this cohort, the parents have said that they've behaved uncharacteristically because they immediately bonded over the sensory resources in the Monet exhibition. And from that moment onwards, they were exploring the museum together, doing their creative projects together, asking each other questions and finding out more about each other, about their lives as people outside of the program. So I think social skills is a big one. And also the skill to reflect. So they're thinking about themselves in a new space, in a new environment, doing new things. And we're discussing. So there's communication skills, there's reflection skills. There's also skills that go along with creating the exhibition. So there's technical skills, mounting their artwork, deciding where it's going to go, and writing narrative to go along with it. So there's that as well. These are all really great life skills that they'll take with them wherever they go and will help them. And I just want to add the parents. I've left them out, and you mentioned it. And the parents absolutely have a 100% integral role in this for themselves. They too are going through EBSA, and they too are really enjoying the time to relax and have time to think and create art and to do this alongside their child. That's another skill. It's like a bonding experience, perhaps, whereby normally they might be at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. So I think that's also quite nice.
That's a very good point, actually, because EBSA is incredibly any experience for a parent where their young child is struggling is a really hard thing emotionally to go through as a parent. And you obviously have that responsibility to support your young person and try and make sure that they're okay. And as parents, we always get pushed to one side, don't we? By ourselves as well as other people. And we feel this immense responsibility of, I need to make sure that my young person is okay. So how I feel and how I'm coping and my mental health and my emotional stability and all of this gets put to one side because I need to make sure they're okay first, and then if I've got time, I'll have a look at myself. And that's what we do as parents, isn't it? And it's kind of instilled into us. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that actually it's incredibly hard on parents navigating something like EBSA with their young person. It's really hard emotionally on them. And you quite rightly say there is the potential that they are spending day in, day out in conflict with their young person because of the expectation on them as a parent to, for instance, get their child into school on that day. So I think it's great that there's the acknowledgement of actually the benefit to the parents involved in this as well, to take the moment to not just get involved and be creative themselves, which we know can be incredibly therapeutic, but actually that bonding moment that you mentioned there, that moment to spend a positive experience with their young person. So it's not always associated with, arguing and conflict and emotion and challenge, but actually we're spending this time together and we're really enjoying each other's company, and I'm getting to see you thrive in this environment and for you to develop, and you're seeing me enjoy it as well. So that element of working together with the parent and the child, I think, is a really positive thing that could come out of this. And so it'd be interesting to see the outcomes for the parents alongside of the outcomes for the children through this. I spoke there about kind of responsibility on the parent, making sure that their young person is okay, the responsibility and the expectation of the parent, making sure that the child is getting into the educational establishment that they're in. How much responsibility do you think is placed on cultural institutions, museums, heritage sites, things like that, in trying to address any sort of exclusion, inequality and things like that? What sort of responsibility do you think it places on them?
I think that museums, as holders of knowledge and history and stories about people, we have a huge responsibility. I think it's our duty to actually make sure that these powerful objects and powerful stories tell the right stories and address and include everyone. So, we need to show community stories. We need to show those who are marginalized. We need to show all the different types of socioeconomic, environmental issues that are affecting people today, if those stories exist in our objects and in our museums. So we have that obligation to make sure those stories support and foster and help our community. 100% and for us, for Northeast Museums, it's part of our, what's the business speak, not our goals, your help me out here.
Priorities.
It's your statement, your moral statement. Yeah. So that is a top priority for us, to make sure that we're addressing those issues through our collections and including those people in order to communicate those stories. Those people need to be spoken to and listened to and have a co-function in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very clear that these projects that you have been working on, and are currently working on, are doing a great job at incorporating that into it and helping with that development and meeting those kind of main priorities of that educational space, because it is an educational space and museums are very much a learning space and that kind of knowledge exchange and transfer of information, things like that. So I think it is important, and I agree there is a huge sense of responsibility on that. What has surprised you most in the work that you've been doing with families and learners who are facing barriers to education?
Surprise is a strange word for me. I think what I've enjoyed the most is the happiness that I see in people feeling included. They have such gratitude, and I think that's terrible because I want it to be commonplace. But putting on programs that are special and make people feel special should be an everyday thing. So the fact that I feel good because these people feel good, I think is amazing, but I shouldn't feel good because these people, they should always feel good. It shouldn't be special, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if I'm making sense. And so when I send families come back repeatedly to workshops that I put on for families, for example, my family programs during the holidays and during school breaks, and they repeatedly come back, and I've seen them grow up. I mean, I've worked with children who were 7 years old, and I worked with them in a SEND school, and then they come to the museum programs, and now they're 13 or 14, and they've been coming repeatedly. That makes me really happy, genuinely happy. And does it surprise me? I don't want to be surprised by it. I want to, you know what I mean? But I guess so. It makes me really pleased, that
Yeah.
they feel included and they feel safe and they feel welcome. And I think that's really important. So, yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think that element of seeing people repeatedly return and engage in something, and especially over, like, that's a vast amount of time, coming from 7 to like 13, for example. So it's clearly doing something positive for that person to repeatedly return and engage in something like that. So I guess seeing that as well, that kind of tangible evidence of what you're doing is making an impact, is a really nice space to be in. It's nice to see that is having that outcome, and that the way that the museum way of learning is actually working for a huge amount of people, which is great. If there's an element of museum learning, the way that museums conduct their learning, transfer their education, if there was a way of moving that into wider education for schools, or, you know, or thinking of any policymakers that might be listening, if they could take one element of museum learning and transfer that across, what would that be?
Well, I think that there's too much learning that's based on passivity, where you're just sitting and listening, or you're going home and you're reading, and there's not enough emphasis on activity. So the one thing I would take is to, whatever you're teaching, and this is what I did when I taught, use this model of I see, I notice, I wonder, where you're thinking and you're looking. So you don't need a right answer. You're not asking a child to have expert knowledge in something, or to have done their homework, or to worry. You're asking them to be themselves and look at something and go, oh, take time, say, I see this. And I noticed that. Oh, and then that makes you think, you know, what if you could ask it a question? And if you did that with all of the subjects, I think people would engage more, you'd get more out of them. And it's inquiry based, so they're going to continue to ask questions. They're going to learn how to ask questions. It's going to be part of their life. And I think learning is about asking questions. So if that becomes natural, it's not scary, it's natural. So that's what I would take away, that it needs to be active learning, not passive learning, and using this inquiry-based approach where children don't need prior knowledge. They're getting the knowledge through you asking them to look.
Beautiful. I think that's such an important point, and I'm glad that was your takeaway from it, because I think thinking of it from a child development, educational learning perspective, I think that's really important. And as we said right back at the beginning of our conversation, it is kind of a myth that museums are not these spaces where you can be active and loud and engaged and fun and sensory and touching and feeling everything. They absolutely are. And I think our conversation today has really demonstrated that fact. And it's great to hear of the amazing work that you're doing, the research that you're doing in this space. And I've no doubt that it will have a huge impact on going forward and feeding into developing these ways of delivering education. You know, it's one thing getting the information out there and showing people that this is one way of learning, but actually how does it develop and morph and grow the more that we do research in it, which you've demonstrated beautifully here. So I think that's great. Anyone listening who wants to know more about the work that you're doing, or wants to get involved in maybe coming to visit or things like that, how can they learn more? Are there websites? Are there links that we can provide underneath the episode for people to come and explore more?
Absolutely. I can provide you with the website for South Shields Museum and Art Gallery, also for Arbella Roman Fort, because I do the programs for both of those. And I'll also highlight the links to the sensory journeys and to the Monet exhibition. So yeah, I will provide all of that, and my email address. I'm always available to answer questions, to help out, because I love what I do and I want people to love it too.
And I can feel that through the screen, your love for what you do and your enthusiasm. And I think that That matters hugely when you're engaged in something like this. So I've no doubt that your enthusiasm in the projects that you work in have a huge impact and why they're so successful as well. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this wonderful information today. I'm really looking forward to following the progress as we go forward. And who knows, maybe when you finish, you can come back on and tell us some of the outcomes that you get.
Absolutely. And thank you, Lucy, so much for having me. I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you, Leslie.